Welcome to Policy Talks. I am Etimofyong. Since its founding in 1958, the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UN COPUOS, meets annually to promote international space cooperation as well as peaceful uses of outer space. In March 1962, COPUOS established two subcommittees, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and the Legal Subcommittee. These two subcommittees have been meeting annually since their establishment. As their name suggests, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee focuses on the scientific and technological aspects of space exploration, while the Legal Subcommittee focuses on the legal and ethical issues that arise from space exploration. Our question today really is, how have African countries fared in the evolving space co-opetition among member states of COPUOS and the subcommittees? Our guest is no other person than Dr. Adigun Ade ABIODUN, who worked in the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOSA, for 22 years. For 18 of those years, he served as the UN expert on space applications. He later served as the chairman of COPUOS after his retirement from the UN, for about 2 years. Dr. ABIODUN in New York, thank you for speaking to us on Policy Talks.
Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, everybody.
Let me start from your time at the UN. The UN and indeed the international system has evolved since you joined the UN in 1977. What was it like joining the UN back then?
Before joining the UN, of course, I had to apply or get appointed or employed there. That was a process that took place between Nigeria and the UN. And when I got here, I started living in New York. The first thing I loathed was all the high-rise buildings, just too many of them. Where the sun was shining, but below on the street, it was either cloud or cold. So, but I had to get used to living in what I call a 24-hour city. And that was not an easy task. Then, when I got into the office, my office then is not USA as we call it today, but it's called OSAD, Outer Space Affairs Division. And so I found myself, just as I did when I was going to school, as the only African in my department. And I think we were about close to 20 people working in that place. With time, I got used to it. And then I found the deliberations of COPUOS and the S&T very boring, very much about all of it lay with politics. And that was the period of the Cold War era. But on the other hand, I had two colleagues, one from Germany, East Germany at that time, and the other was from the USSR. And the three of us and our boss at that time, an Indian, Mr. Murthy, we were the four people in the space application section. So between the four of us, we ran the program. My first, I got there in July of 1977, and I was eventually sent to Kenya to organize, to prepare for a meeting later in 1978. And also in 1978, I went to Rome. But what I remember very much about the first time I went to India, to Kenya, but I arrived in Kenya the day they were burying Jomo Kenyatta. So that was a big experience for me. Hold on a second, I'm having some difficulty with my computer. Okay, so basically it was a good experience to be there. And then at the end of at the beginning of my second year at the UN, the deputy chief of our office, Mr. Marvin Robinson, invited me to the office. And he said, Ade, your government seconded you here for 2 years. So, but the UN has decided to retain you permanently. But we cannot do that on our own. You have to get your government to send us a letter of release. So I walk across the street, Nigerian Mission is just about 2 blocks or 1.5 blocks from the UN building. And I met the ambassador there, the deputy head of the mission. And I told him my story. And he said, so what do you want me to do? I said, please, can you write them in Lagos and let them send a letter of release? And then he said, who am I supposed to write in Lagos? I said, wait a minute. I'm not a member of the Foreign Service that sent me here. You are. So please, can you do that? Anyway, to cut a long story short, he was just trying to pull my legs. And then he called his secretary, dictated a letter, and gave me the letter, which was the letter of release. And from that day, then the UN processed it. And in those days, you work as on probation. And I think my first year was my probation year. And so I became a permanent staff of the UN, as from 1978. So.
And then shortly after that, that's about 1981, you appointed the UN expert on space applications.
Right.
Did you feel qualified for the position at that time?
Oh, okay. Before applying for that post in 1979, I joined the UN as a P3. And when I joined, in actual fact, they were paying me my exact salary at IFE, where I was teaching. That was what I was very surprised, but that was my salary. So in 1979, I went straight to the head of the office, Professor Perek of the Czech Republic. And I said, sir, I've been with you for 2 years. I'm looking around this office. I'm sorry to put it that way, but in terms of qualification, I think I'm highly qualified. You know my qualification. I don't have to tell you what they are. In terms of my job performance, you know what my job performance is. So simply put, sir, I am underrated and I'm underpaid. And I hope your capacity as chief of this office, you will do something about it. So, and that was the conversation. Then we had an Indonesian gentleman who was then the chief, not the expert. But when the Indian left, the Indian expert left in, I think he left in 1979, then early 1980, they appointed a lawyer from the conference services section to be our boss. And it was difficult for us. And it was difficult for him as well. So eventually he managed to find his way out of the place. And then my 2 colleagues from Russia, USSR, and Germany said, Ade, we are going to recommend you to be our acting chief. I said, what? You know, and then I was just a P4. They promoted me to P4 by then in 81. This was about 81 March. Something like 81 March. Yeah, they put 81 March. And I said, no. I don't think no, don't do that. Anyway, so they told me to draft the letter and sign it to give to the boss. So I drafted the letter, but I said I cannot draft the letter for my own upgrade and sign it as well. That is improper. So you are the only 2 who will sign it. So they signed it, and the 3 of us walked into the office of Mr. Marvin Robinson then. Professor Perek had retired by that time. Robinson was our chief of OSAD. And then he looked at me and he smiled. He said, Ade, you are going to be, they are recommending you to be acting chief of the space application section. I said, sir, what is wrong with that, sir? He said, but nothing. I said, he said, but you are going to be meeting the ambassadors and the ministers and this and that. I said, sir, all I can ask you is to ask the expert that was there before, the Indian who are retired, and the man who served as chief, who had gone somewhere else, who was doing most of the job for them in the office. And he just signed. And so at the end of that day, the Deputy Secretary General of our department then issued a circular indicating that I was appointed as the acting chief of the office. Then they advertised the post, and I approached a Sierra Leonean colleague. I said, sir, this post is here. I've acted for 3 months, and I'm not sure whether I should apply. He said, the Secretary General has the right to appoint anybody to any office at any level. This office is there, and this post is there. You tell me if there's anybody else who has done the job more than you have, and who is qualified as you are, and who knows the details of the job more than you do. So, to cut a long story short, I kept quiet, applied for the post, and then on November 3rd, then I came into the UN building, and the personal assistant of the deputy, the Undersecretary General for our department, he and I were in the same elevator, and we are going to the 32nd floor. And we got to the 32nd floor, and he opened the door, and he said, after you. And I said, oh my goodness. And he was of a higher rank than myself at that time. And he said, can I see you in my office? And I followed him to his office. And then he turned around, he opened the window and everything, and turned around. Said, Mr. ABIODUN, I'm happy to inform you that the Undersecretary General as of today appointed you as the chief of the space application section and the UN expert on space applications. And all I said, more than anything, it was a 3-letter word, wow. So that's the story.
So the Indian that you referred to, that's Dr. Murthy.
Exactly.
After him, Mr. Padang.
Right.
And then after you was the Japanese astronaut, Takao Doi.
I think Sergio acted briefly when Maslan was there. Yeah, but I think it was, but Takao came anyway eventually after me. Yes, he came after me.
So that's as the UN expert on space applications, and that position was actually created by a decision of the UN General Assembly.
Right.
After Takao Doi left, nobody has been appointed into that position.
Right.
Why is that? Why is that?
It's the politics of the UN. It's the politics of the UN. Because when let me put it back again. The post was created after the fourth Unispace in '68. And in creating that post, actually the first Unispace, the motion to have that conference was moved by Sierra Leone. So when the post was created, there were a lot of debate as to where that particular post should be. And eventually they put it in the Outer Space Affairs Division. But from my personal experience, it was a lot of tussle between the expert and the chief of the office, because the chief of the office was earning a D1 salary and the expert was D1 salary as well. So there was that personal and an unspoken contention in rank. The second contention was that the chief, not all of them, because I served under 4 chiefs, but 2 of them who are lawyers were very unhappy that they couldn't tell me what to do. Because as expert, I had a mandate to work with my officers in my office, plan the program, and it is only the committee and the subcommittee that has the right to approve or disapprove or whatever we are proposing. And you can go back and check the record. We did everything for 18 years and no single delegate complained of any proposal or any report we brought to the attention of the committee for action. But back in the office, it was also always a tussle. And basically, but not up, so as a result of that, when the last chief, the last director of USA, an Italian lady, when she came, she said, "Oh, but I'm qualified to be expert." This after Doyle left, and I don't know how she managed it, because I've tried to get to the root of it, but I've not succeeded. But he told them I was expert, and so they left the post of expert on field. And in actual fact, it is now abolished. And so they've removed the post of expert, and instead they created the post of advisor. And I think the job is now for recruitment. They've advertised it. Be an advisor to the director of the office. The director of the office will be a D2, and this individual, when recruited, will be a D1. It will be a D2, and will then be coordinating all the technical and scientific activities of USA, whereas the legal section, the conference services section, will be doing that. And whoever now is in charge of space application is not going to be called expert anymore, just a chief of the space application section with a salary grade of P5 rather than a D1. So, but it is internal politics put together and orchestrated by the recently retired director of the office. That is my personal opinion based on the piece of information I've been able to put together.
So you mentioned Unispace 1, 1968.
Right.
And then you were employed at about 1981 when preparation for Unispace 2 was already in top gear.
Right.
And I guess that also means that you were going to be, if not responsible, but you played a major role in Unispace 2. And one of the outcomes of that Unispace conference was the establishment of the regional centers for space science and technology education around the world. What was the intent of these centers?
The intent of the centers was very simple. When I was employed at the UN, we were running training courses. As I indicated earlier on, we were running training courses, workshops, seminars. We joined ITC in the Netherlands to run some workshops for decision makers and so on and so forth. But everything we did were mostly in the industrialized countries. For the decision makers, we had to go to the developing countries. But for most of our training courses, we did a lot in the US, many in India, and then we had a program with FAO and WMO as well from time to time. But by the time I became the UN expert, it has dawned on me that this was not working, because many of these courses were short-term, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks at most. And many of the participants, they became the envy of their superiors when they go back to their countries, and they were not given opportunity to go out to continue receiving better education. And yet the need is there for the developing countries to have a better understanding of this discipline in order to be able to effectively use it for their own sustainable development. So, and Unit Space 2 was in progress. So we put forward a proposal that will allow us to do something different than what was going on in the office. And we went ahead and discussed with our colleagues in many parts of the world about this. And everybody was very excited about it. But I ran into trouble immediately back in the office because the Secretary General of the conference, Mr. Yashpal, Professor Yashpal of India, had his own idea of what the future of the office should be. So I was lucky enough, I had a friend in the person of Ambassador Novotny of Austria. So, and she was a very high-powered delegate within the Austrian delegation. So with her support, all the proposals I put on the table were approved by the committee to do something more than the short-term training courses. We just called it at that time long-term opportunities for education and training in the developing countries in the area of not only remote sensing, including communication, satellite meteorology, disaster management, and so on and so forth. And that was agreed. So the question is exactly what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And so we went ahead and conducted three regional meetings. One in Brazil for Latin America, one in India for Asia, and one in Nigeria for Africa and the Middle East. And then I had a delegate from Britain, Miss Elizabeth Taylor, and with her help, Britain offered to host what I call a round-up conference or meeting to summarize and put together the recommendation from these three other meetings. And we did that in 1989 at university. I had a professor friend at Dundee University. And so he invited us. And we did that. And we got the recommendation and we brought it back to New York. And when we got there, it was approved. And so the focus then was to do a few things. And that is one, get the centers established. Let the center focus on recruiting highly qualified people, give priority to university educators, because if you teach many people you feed a whole country rather than if you feed yourself. So we did all of that, and then we also went to Spain and got the Spanish government to give us the opportunity to develop a curriculum that we have now. And so the centers were supposed to be a long-term education, research, and training facility, not only for educators, but for people in the fields of application. And they were to be there for 9 months, and they should go back to their respective countries and do some research and do some application, because in the past, when people went abroad for training, the application opportunities were on the work being done in the country or in their host country. Now it is in their own country. And then we also indicate that there should be opportunity for these graduates to come back for refresher courses if necessary, and that the centers also should go ahead and open itself up to the community where it is being hosted, to educate the communities and to serve as a beacon for the decision makers so that they can equally appreciate the role of space in their development. And basically, that was what we did. And everybody appeared to agree. And with passage of time, we set up the centers, one in India for Asia and the Pacific, and the one in Latin America was between Mexico and Brazil. They are co-hosts. And then the one in the Middle East was not established while I was expert, because there was a lot of tussle politically. But the one in Africa we established two, one in Nigeria and one in Morocco. The Morocco one is for French-speaking countries, while the one in Nigeria is for English-speaking countries. Left to my office at that time, the chief of the office wanted the English and French to be combined and placed in Morocco. And I told him point blank, yes, you can do that, but not when I'm expert on space applications. So basically that was it.
So when you left, the one in the Middle East was later established.
Right.
That was in Jordan. That's presently in Jordan.
Right. Well, we left that recommendation, but it was not implemented because there was still a tussle between Iran, Syria, Iraq was equally competing for it at that time.
And then after that, China now got a center, and a center is even about to be established in Russia, but for the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war. So it appears it's no more developing countries, it's now going to developed countries. Was that the vision for the centers?
No. The goal of the center at that time was mostly for the benefit of the developing countries. In actual fact, when we first started, I think a member of the Japanese delegation put me aside and said, can we host this center in Japan? And I said, no, I'm sorry, no, you couldn't. Now, the center in China, you can write an encyclopedia on it. The Chinese could not accept that we did not select China as the host of the Asia Pacific countries. They did everything, including ostracizing me for 2 years, not talking to me at the UN. Nigeria and China have the same day of independence and they celebrate the same day. So for 2 years, they didn't send me an invitation to come to the Chinese celebration in Vienna, but I eventually did. So anyway, China went unilaterally, not the UN. China went unilaterally to establish a center purposely to compete with the one in India. And and they got some of the Pacific Asian countries to go along with them. So and they did, and so they came back to COPUOS and lobbied and lobbied aggressively and ferociously, even including name calling about me when I was there, because they were personally offended by my decision. They thought it was my unilateral decision, and that because they took me around and they said, "Look, we are doing this. We are the best. We are the first to do this in Asia. We are the first to do that in this. We are, you know." And I finally told them that yes, I recognize that, but those are not the qualifications we are looking for. We are looking for the ability to communicate, the ability to experiment, and the ability to get the people to understand why they're here. We are not saying that you are not qualified, but we believe that it will be in the best interest of Asia and the Pacific region to put the center in India. And that's what we did.
Okay, and so talking about Unispace also, Unispace 2, 1982, Unispace 3, just when you're about to retire, 1999. And due to rapid developments in space, there have been recent calls for another Unispace conference. What are your thoughts on this?
Now, I have done some research on that. I think it's not the call for Unispace. It is the use of the word Unispace. If you go today to India, you find that they have a program in India called Unispace Nanosatellite Assembly and Training at ISRO. And the acronym for that organization is UNNATI, okay? And it's more or less, I don't know exactly the details of that. Then in 2005 or 2004, when I was chairman of COPUOS, we had Unispace 3+5. Because people wanted to know how were the recommendations of Unispace 3 being implemented. And eventually we got to the point of establishing what we call action teams. I think there are about 14 of them. So those action teams then address different issues, sustainable development, what I call water and health, all those specifics. And in 2018, there was Unispace +50, which was to commemorate the first Unispace of 1968. Now they are speaking about space 2030, not Unispace, but space 2030. But basically to address the issue of what we call it, sustainable development, and essentially that is what they are focusing on now with the because when the program of sustainable development first started, the goal was to do to come back and more or less wrap it up in the year 2030 and summarize everything that has been done in that category. So basically, there's no call. I don't see any plan for a new Unispace at the same level as the first 3 Unispace activities. But I must admit also that if there is that call, it is being done by the developing countries. because they were the movers of the first, the second, and the third conferences. Although by the time any of the three conferences got held, the industrialized countries will have embraced the concept of Unispace and also added their own program and agenda to it so that it becomes something everybody can embrace. So that is what is going on. Right now, I think the focus in the next year or two also is basically on health, and this is where the committee is going on as part of the agenda, of Unispace.
Okay, what about the call to reopen the Outer Space Treaty for?
No. Wait a minute. Okay, yeah. You see, there are also some other issues. There is a call to revisit the Outer Space Treaties and even all the treaties and principles of that have been agreed to by COPUOS and endorsed by the General Assembly. So then also, but then there is a fear about the anti-satellite issues. There is a concept of anti-satellite program whereby people are now believing that the militarization of outer space is rearing its head again. There was something like that before, but the treaty insisted that outer space had to be for peaceful purposes. So that is still there. Then there is a climate change and global warming issue. That is also getting attention about the getting attention of the committee, and particularly the developing countries. And they are claiming that they are not the ones that are doing the polluting of the environment, and therefore they should not be saddled with having to pay for it in one way or the other. And so there have been so many conferences, and many more are still in place. Also, there are the need for international coordination and cooperation at the global level in disaster management and emergency response. So these are the issues that are of concern. And to many of the countries, particularly the developing ones, and the way to get about it, they believe, is to have another Unispace, whereas for the industrialized countries, the plan is to see how to address these issues with all the recommendations that already came out of Unispace 3, and we implemented them. Didn't they address these issues when we put these recommendations, when we put the appropriate recommendations in each category forward? And so that's why you're having Unispace 3 plus 5, Unispace 3 plus 20, and so on and so forth. And that's, you are going to have some of that for some time, because organizing a Unispace is very, very intensive. It's very intensive. It's a major effort on the part of the UN and on the part of the host country. It is a very, very major effort. It takes about 5 years to prepare for one once the decision is made. So it is not a conference you approve and organize with in a casual attitude. It has to be very reasoned, and I think the dialogue is still going on. The only thing in COPUOS is that you do not vote. Everything is done by consensus, and so eventually they will reach a consensus on what is to be done.
I want you to talk a bit more about the Outer Space Treaty. Like you mentioned, there's a call to reopen the Outer Space Treaty because it does not address many of the emerging technologies and many of the issues that have come up today. So what are your thoughts on that? They've been discussing this, and I know
Mr. Moderator, you yourself, you are interested in this subject very much. First and foremost, the developing countries are not happy about this issue of first come, first serve, which has dominated the allocation of orbital slots at the GSO. So that is it's a contentious issue, and the Latin American countries in particular, with the support of a few other equatorial countries around the world, have supported them, and therefore that agenda item has become almost a permanent agenda item every year in COPUOS, in S&T, in the legal subcommittee, as well as in the main COPUOS. So that is one. And then the others is the issue of space debris. Many developing countries are launching satellites into space without any capability to monitor the progress of those satellites in space, other than the data they are receiving if it's a remote sensing satellite, or the signals they are receiving if it's a communication satellite. So the question is, who is going to bail us out? Of course, you can harden some of the satellites, but there's a limit to how much you can do that at the cost of doing that. So there are discussions on that. Then there are discussions on more or less deorbiting satellites when they expire in space. How is that going to clutter outer space? And then there is the issue when I think China and the US, I think I'm correct in that, they've deorbited certain satellites by more or less disintegrating them. And the question is this right or is it wrong? And therefore, does that not increase the amount of space debris we have? And what is the health of the outer space environment for the satellites of other countries? So these are some of the conditions, some of the problems, and that are being investigated or being discussed rigorously. I'm not sure whether the US did that, but I know China did one on that. So basically, that is it.
So, what is your own position? Will you advocate for the outer space treaties to be reopened and renegotiated so that these issues that are coming up can be accommodated within the outer space treaty, so that there will be, some level of regulation? What's your own position?
Yeah, there is no problem in reopening any of for me. There is no, as long as we are alive and the technology is improving and our understanding of outer space is improving, we cannot keep ourselves away from looking at the decisions that have been made in the past. Yes, we can look at the treaties and examine them, but are the developing countries ready? And when I use the word, are they ready? They have to be there with the right people to negotiate for them. They have experts back home. Are they there at the negotiating table? The right people to discuss the right issue. This is the key problem for me, because I personally experienced it as chief of the chairman of COPUOS. I experienced it where delegates were not coming. There are some delegates who have signed up to be members of COPUOS for over 40 years. And when you look on record, they have not been there for over 50, 75% of the time. So what is the significance of you being then a member of the committee that you are not serving or you are not participating in actively? So you have to be an active member, and you have to bring the best brain you have to negotiate with the others. Because
So
we are talking about collaboration, and collaboration begins when you come almost at the same level of understanding of what you are going to discuss.
So in general, what has been the, give us a sense of the Africa's contributions to COPUOS. You were there as chair, you worked at the UN-USA, you advisor to the Nigerian delegation for several years. So generally, what has been the performance or contributions of African countries?
Now, it is not, the performance is not something you can write home about. When I was chairman, there were 13 African member states in the committee, and I think at that time the committee had about 65 total number of members. Out of these 13 member states, I think only about 7 of them were coming to the meetings. And out of the 7, only about 4 of them were active. The others were not. And so my position is that this is not serving Africa well. And the same thing this year, last year rather. Presently, I think about COPUOS has 100 member states, out of which there are 20 from Africa. And in both these, in all the 3 branches of COPUOS, the main committee and in the S&T and LEGO, there were only 11 African member states that attended the meetings out of the 20. So this is very problematic. And what that does is it compromises Africa. It's a disservice to the continent. I said much about it. And I think I had 1 or 2 meetings with the African ambassadors in Vienna. And I think this is their responsibility to their individual countries that are represented in the committees to press upon the authorities back home the importance of this particular committee, which I may mention is the most admired committee of the UN. Every country wants to be part of it. Now you get there and you are not doing much. So why are you there? Why don't you give room for another country that can be more effective? So, and then not only that, you bring people, bring the right people. When you go to COPUOS and you look at Germany, Russia, United States, China, Japan, France, they have experts and political advisors there, apart from the ambassadors. The ambassadors probably rarely speak except for the ceremonial meeting. After that, they leave everything for the experts to address. We don't do that. We don't bring the right people to the meetings. Not only when I use the word right people, I mean people who are qualified to address the issue on the table and to have the ability to make meaningful contribution, not to sit down on their seats and not give a sentence or make any pronouncement, for a 10-day meeting period. It is not in Africa's best interest.
Maybe one of the problem may be the overdependence of developing countries or African countries on developed countries. We often tend to focus on foreign interventions in Africa and often we exclude that Africa can also contribute even in international context. So what is, to your understanding, what kind of contributions do you think developing countries can bring into the international system and even into regions like Europe and other parts of the world?
You can bring your own ideas. You said everybody comes to these meetings to address their own concerns. So if you have to do your own homework before you come to the meetings, because you are talking about a meeting of equals. Every country is supposed to be equal to the next one, even though we know in reality that's in theory. But nevertheless, you come to the meeting, you're coming to talk about space. So what can space do for your country? And what is space doing for others? And how do you get the committee to recognize your aspiration and help you to understand it? But it's not just you are talking about your own country alone. You are talking about a community of nations. So you need to work with your partners from your continent or from your region. Africans need to work together. So it's not just you are there to champion what is good for your own country, but you need to take into consideration the needs of neighboring countries in the region, and so on and so forth. So basically, know your own situation before you come, and get the right people to come and advocate and articulate your concerns.
One of the concerns from developing countries is what appears to be what you may call a privatization of the UN, maybe because of the poor funding of the UN, especially when the last US administration that they've kind of pulled out from many of the committees of the UN. The UN is turning to transnational corporate actors in different bodies, different committees within the UN. Even in UNOSA, you may be aware that Sierra Nevada offered some space flights for microgravity experiments for developing countries. Do you have any concerns, or what are your concerns about this trend of the UN turning to corporate actors?
Now, I've just become aware of that very lately. So I'm not fully informed as to the merits or demerits. But at a personal level, I'll be very cautious because anything dealing with the private sector should stay in the private sector at the private sector level. But when you mix international negotiation among governments with private entities, somebody eventually is going to lose. And in this case, it is the recipient of the goods that is going to lose. Because if you depend on all this legacy that are coming forward, what happens when the pipe is turned off and that type of support for the big program you've set up on the basis of this legacy, when that support is no longer there, what do you do for those who depend on such services? It's not right. I don't believe so. I may be wrong. I have to do a better research on the subject to see how it is being managed at present, because I don't know.
Okay, so I think we need to start rounding up, but I think let's talk a bit about career, especially for those who are students and young professionals joining us or that might listen to this recording later. So you've had an excellent career in the space sector, both at the international community, even in your home country, Nigeria. You are appointed as the senior special advisor to the then president on space. You've also assisted the African Union, you're a member of the African Union Space Working Group. So for students and young professionals who are interested in pursuing a career in space, What advice do you have for them?
Now, if you, okay, basically, the issue of young professionals coming into the field, whether you are coming in space or in any area, you come prepared. That's the first thing. Know your profession, know your field, and be prepared to make your contribution in that field. Then be sure of who you are. A language skill, especially if you want to be traveling around the world, the language skill is something you need to hone in. Whether it's English, French, Spanish, Chinese, maybe you have to do that. Finally, or not finally, you need to also improve or make sure that whatever you undertake, wherever you are, you do your best. You are just your best. And if you are going to go into space or any of the S&T disciplines, your STEM must be very, very strong. Basically, understanding and appreciation of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics must be second to none. And wherever you are, you're a human being like anybody else. Just realize that you can make mistakes, and nobody is perfect. So recognize that and move on in life. And also you do whatever you do with a lot of courage, believing in hope, exhibit kindness and friendliness to others, and you get a similar reward from them. And I think finally, my concluding remark on that would be that you are going to have difficulties. Life is a challenge, but you should never panic. But take a hold of yourself, put on your thinking cap all the time, and let God do the rest for you. And that same God will empower you to make a difference and be an agent of change wherever you go. So that is what I need to say.
In the same vein, there are also people that are interested in working for an international organization. You know, from our discussion, your entry to the UN almost appears like luck. I don't know whether people can have such luck these days, but what advice will you have for somebody who is interested in a career in an international organization or in international system? Maybe it's UN, USA, or African Union, or any other international organization.
The time I joined the UN, there was no internet as we have it today. Everything was by mail. So, but today you have the internet, and therefore with the internet you can search the whole world for whatever you want in the comfort of your own house. So continue searching. That would be the first thing. Before I got to the UN myself, I did a lot of search, and I got so much commendation that you are qualified, but unfortunately we have no vacancy, or there'll be vacancy this year or that year. But the only thing you must believe, you have to believe in yourself, just like I did. Believe in yourself. And I was lucky because I just went to the conference. I had the opportunity to address the conference, and the chief of the Outer Space Affairs Division was there. He listened to me, and then he said, we have a vacancy in our office. Are you interested? And I said, no. I wasn't interested. And he went back to New York. He came back to New York. He gave the GON application form to the ambassador, and then they sent it to me to fill. So I filled, and that was it. So go with, don't panic. Believe in yourself. That's the first thing. You have to believe in yourself, and don't give up. Yes, do not give up. Before, if you give up, then who is going to bail the cat for you? That would be what you just have to continue.
Okay, let me just try and chip in this. This will be my last question.
Sure.
What are the current challenges within the global space governance system, and how can they be addressed?
What do you mean by a governance system?
So, well, when you look at the space governance, the system, including the UN system, COPUOS, and other systems that are not under UN, to regulate space activities. You already mentioned a few of them before, like the issues of anti-satellite, space debris. How can these issues be addressed, especially since in some quarters, they don't want the outer space treaties to be reopened? So in your view, how could these emerging issues be addressed?
For the developing countries, the only contribution you can make there is to improve your own capability, enhance your own capability, enhance your knowledge, and invest in the field. Just don't talk about it. The biggest problem we have is the fact that you have a lot of countries who believe that they can just go into space, and that going to space will give them enough power. They will be recognized as a space country. And a number of countries believe that because they have satellites in space, they are a space power, which is an anomaly. It's just unbelievable that any country would think that way, but there are many who think so. So my belief is that most countries, or all countries, should try to empower themselves, not by buying satellites, but by exposing themselves to the necessary knowledge and understanding of space. And with that, you are in a better position to negotiate. You cannot be negotiating in vacuum when you don't have a good understanding of the issues at stake. You are not coming there as a journalist who's going to write about the discussion. You are supposed to contribute to the discussion. So until you bring yourself up with enough capabilities and sound knowledge, you cannot do any collaboration or negotiation. And for me, this is the most critical issue. To do any of the issues any country wants to bring up for discussion, or to improve it, or to enhance it, or to make it more accommodating, you come there with knowledge. And as long as your own knowledge is not at par, not necessarily at par, but highly competitive with the others, you don't have much to offer in the negotiation.
Maybe let me just try and add this, just related to this. Just less than 2 weeks ago, the African Space Agency was kind of officially opened. Egypt handed the building over to the African Union, and you were part of the African Union Space Working Group. What would you wish that the African Union Commission did differently?
Now, it is the same thing. there are a few, I don't know how many countries in Africa now that have satellites, and therefore many of them are more or less the front runners in this area. But a space agency is supposed to do what? And I remember the members of the African Union. How are they going to fund the agency? And is space really serving Africa the way it's serving other continents and other peoples of the world today? And the question is, who is going to be paying the bills? Who is paying the bills right now? And who's going to pay the bills later? I don't know, but it is a very difficult question for me, because when we started with what I call the African Space Working Group, African Union Space Working Group, our goal was to get the AU to understand that if Africa is going to be proficient in this field, it has to use its own people. It cannot get an African space policy formulated by somebody outside Africa, as was being done before. I remember I was in Addis Ababa to speak with them on October 1, 2012 to address this issue. And that was the beginning of our discussion that led eventually to the formulation of the African Union Space Working Group. Now that the space policy and the strategy have been developed, those in charge disbanded. At least I didn't get any letter, but I know they've disbanded the African Union Space Working Group. Where is the African Union getting its advice from? This is one question. Where are the experts that are advised? I know they have staff there in the S&T department, but outside the AU itself, do they have another body that is offering them advice to move forward? And the space agency, what is the space agency supposed to do? Coordinate or be an operator? And how is it going to carry this out? So I have a lot of lingering questions on this.
Okay, I think maybe we'll have to maybe continue the discussion maybe some other time. I think we have to end at this point. Thank you, Dr. ABIODUN, for speaking with us.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity.